everything grew out of proportion. It just was the way that it was. I was gangly and skinny, and like I had braces, and I was a junior. I had, the big eyebrows. Like it wasn't what it seems. So I had a big personality. I would overcompensate. I was the cocky guy, but I wasn't the smart guy.
What happened between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively? I have no idea, just like you have no idea. Nobody knows unless we were there with them. I'm going to play this for you only because Justin was on my show a few years ago. You'll see me interacting with him as I experienced him. I'm not taking sides. This is just something that you may want to watch if you want to know more. This show is all about getting to the real person, not just the same old polished image that everybody sees, really like the human being. I'm all about the human being. So
Got it.
reading
So
your
really
book.
famous, really famous is like, it's a play on words. It's like, who are you really? Yeah, well, that makes sense. It's who are you really, right? It's like,
Yeah,
well, I mean, that's what man enough is. Man enough is like a reclaiming of that phrase.
that's
But
exactly
anyways, you were
right.
saying, okay, so we're gonna get down to who am I really? But you were gonna say, tell me, what did you think? What did you think of the rough copy of the book that you read?
So I kind of felt like you had taken all your insecurities, right? And you decided, I'm just going to expose them all and share them with everybody, which I can't imagine how hard that would be. So I think you nailed that.
I nailed sharing all my insecurities. Well, it wasn't even all of them, so it was only a portion of them. So that just goes to show you.
Book two.
Yeah, nobody wants to read that though. Nobody wants to read the book two of the insecurities. Book two is going to be what I learned from book one. Um,
It
but
was
okay,
interesting too how
so
you said at one point that Emily said, "This is really good, but you need to read your own book."
yeah, I think that was in the well, like you clearly made it through the end of the book because that was at
Yeah.
the end of the book. Yeah, and it's true. We write. I don't believe, and what I think I said it somewhere in the book is like you might write a book, but it doesn't make you an expert at everything. It doesn't mean that you're perfect at implementing the very things that you're writing about. I often joke that I wrote a book called Man Enough, yet don't feel man enough to have written it. And that's kind of the great irony that is everything that we're doing. Um, but yeah, so my wife read it and she's like, "This is really, really good. But baby, you need to read your own book." And it's true because I got to remind myself. And what she was really getting at was, the reminder that I am who I am is enough. And she's always telling me to be nice to her husband. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, she's a badass. Was there a part? I'm going to interview you. Was there a part of the book that really touched you, that really made you think, or made you? You said you were married.
Yeah.
Made you look at the man in your life or men in your life differently?
Totally. And I'll tell you one other level that I have to this is that I'm a therapist as well. So I'm not a practicing therapist anymore, but that's my background.
Got it.
So I have even a little bit more of an angle or an interesting perspective. So that might make you think, I hope it doesn't close you up or, shut you down right now. I don't think
Okay.
it
I go to
will.
therapy. I go to therapy multiple times a week.
Love that. I love that. We
Yeah,
can talk about that too. So
sure.
you wanted to know which parts touched me. So I think what I thought of most was less about my husband and more about my sons growing up.
Mm,
So I have one daughter and two sons. And so that, I think a lot of what you were talking about, especially at the beginning when you got right into what the culture tells you, what the other boys tell you, you need to say, do, or act to be a boy, to be a man, to have balls. It's interesting that to be a man, you have to be the opposite of a woman, which growing up would be a girl and a boy, obviously. So that was very interesting from the get-go. So like you got me right from the start, I think when you started to talk about that. And while I think that a lot of that is true, I don't think I realized on that level what boys have to deal with and
yeah.
how that, the societal norms impact everybody. So I'll pick that as my first thing, my main thing. What do you
Awesome.
think?
That I haven't. I'm very happy that yeah, because I imagine as a mom, you don't really, you send your kid to school, but you don't realize what he's learning at school. you know,
Yeah.
and the social forces that he's up against. And so, hopefully what it does is it gives people some compassion for what boys have to go through. And doesn't justify or give anyone a free pass, but it does show how hard it is for us to go against those forces, and the need to ask ourselves questions and to start to understand what those forces are, so that we can then start to overpower them ourselves.
Yeah, and there's that interesting cycle too of the abused sort of becomes the abuser, like you practice what happened to you on other people.
Yeah, that's masculinity,
Yeah.
right? I often, I talk about, there's a part of the book where I talk about how one day I could be, being tied to a goalpost by the upperclassmen, on the soccer team. And then the next day I would score a winning goal, and then I would be tying someone else to the goalpost. And that goalpost is masculinity. That's what it is. It's this thing that, as boys and as men, you grow up and you want to be accepted by the other boys. You want to be liked. You want to be considered cool. And then, you get tied to the goalpost or bullied and picked on. And then you find somebody who has a lower standing than you or smaller than you or something than you, then you can put down to build yourself up. Right.
Yeah.
So all we're doing is just perpetuating the cycle of abuse and bullying and harm. And it's got to stop at some point.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it was so interesting too. I just lost my train of thought for a second, but it was something that you said about so you were a sensitive and emotional boy growing up, like from the get-go. This is, by the way, this is really like the instant that I really felt like, okay, this is so interesting to see this perspective, because my son, my youngest son especially, is like that. Like he's emotional and sensitive to other people's feelings. Not sensitive in the you said this, we kind of use the word sensitive incorrectly, right? Do you remember writing that? Well, of course you remember writing everything.
Yeah, of course.
50 times over, I'm sure.
It's a displaying, right? It's like, it's a positive. The way it's described in the dictionary is like, it's a positive thing. It's a trait that all of us should aspire to, yet we use it as a negative thing.
Right. And like to associate that with like boys aren't supposed to be like that, that is so wrong, right? The more sensitive we all are, the better off we all are. So that's so interesting. So from the get-go, you were like, this is not acceptable. I can't be sensitive and have emotions, which, is such a mistake, but it makes sense that boys grow up with this. And I guess girls grow up with it too, assuming that that's the case, that how they're supposed to view it.
Yeah. Well, Bell Hooks talks about it, and I read about it in the book. Bell Hooks talks about the psychic act of mutilation that all boys have to kind of wage on themselves, right? It's a war against our own feelings, our own sensitivity. In order to be accepted, we have to mutilate psychically those parts of ourselves, almost make them not exist, so that we can appear to be strong and impermeable, which is the opposite of vulnerable. Vulnerable makes us weak, right? Vulnerable is the thing that makes us vulnerable to an attack, by having or displaying, feelings or showing things that will make us just, vulnerable to then have those things used against us, which is an attack. So we have to cut those feelings off from ourselves, so that we don't even know how we're feeling half the time. You ask us how we're feeling, we're like, good, good, okay, fine, good. But how are we really feeling? I don't know. You ever ask someone like a follow-up question to that? Like, no, but how are you really feeling? What's happening in your heart? We have no clue. Our brains go, I don't know. And that just right there is a problem. We just need to, and I have the problem. And I wrote the damn book. Half the time, I don't know how I'm feeling. I have to actually check in. My wife says, how are you? And I'm like, good. I'm like, oh shit, I'm doing it to myself. I'm like, okay, how am I feeling? And then I go to therapy, and it's like, how are you actually feeling? What's the feeling behind that? And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm feeling. Holy shit, I'm stuck in it. I'm stuck in the hamster wheel too. Just because you write a book on it, or you're aware of it, doesn't mean that you're not affected by the same things.
Right. So what are you working on in therapy? Is it a lot of the stuff that you talk about in the book, or are there other things?
Right now, well, what I'm working on, ironically, in therapy is actually tapping into how I feel about things. Like, what am I feeling? Like, I'm pretty good at like saying what I'm feeling, but what am I actually feeling? How do I feel about that? Because still, it doesn't matter if I'm able to feel. I have 37 years of repression, of repressing feelings for my own protection that it doesn't just get undone over a day or a week or a year or 2 years. It's like checking in with myself. So it's like I might be angry about something, but then what, all we know, and you're a therapist, all anger is unexpressed pain, right? And sadness. So it's like, well, what am I actually hurt by or sad about? Where's that come from? And until we actually get a chance to really know what those things are, like you're just stuck. You're just stuck.
Right. So you use that why questioning. You ask yourself, well, why
Yeah. The
do
why
I feel
ladder.
this way? Yeah, the why ladder.
Yeah.
And I've heard of people using that before, and I think that's good. And maybe in a way, women are a little bit better at figuring out the why or the
Well, you said
feeling.
it. I mean, you said it, not me, but yes,
I
absolutely.
know. I said it. And I'm a woman. And, again, it doesn't mean that men aren't able to or shouldn't be or can't. Well, that's the same thing, but it's just
Yeah.
that you've been trained not to. Like, what? You wipe those emotions, put those emotions on the side, right?
And what you're describing, and just for anyone who's listening, what you're describing is in the book, I talk about the why ladder, which is asking why multiple times to get to the root core of why you are doing something, what you are actually feeling, what's motivating you. And I think I talk about it specifically in the body image chapter, like around working out or what is it like. And that was just like the right place to put it because the book was just getting too long and I didn't know where else to put it. But, it's like, why do I want to work out? What is it? Is it because I'm feeling insecure because I'm been staring at Instagram for an hour and all I see is these like aspirational, like super fit people and I feel bad about myself. So is that coming from a place of lack? Or do I want to work out because like I just want to feel good? Or do I want to work out because I get energy when I work out and my blood is pumping and like, it causes it causes like a dopamine hit and or my hormones, whatever it is. What's the why? Or is it just because like, man, I am not flexible right now and I want to be flexible so that I can run around with my kids and not pull my hamstring? Any reason is good so long as you know the answer. But so often we like just go and we do something and we don't even know why we're doing it. And so the idea is to start to train yourself to understand the actual motivations for why. And generally you can get to the root with two whys, if not three. So right now, as an example, I'm a Baha'i in the Baha'i faith right now, from sunrise to sunset for 19 days, we're fasting. It's called the Baha'i fast. And what's funny is you don't realize how often you walk to that fridge, you open it, you're not even hungry, or you just want something, right? And so now I'm fasting. I'm between sunrise and sunset. I'm not eating or drinking. I get to ask myself why. Well, shit. Oh, I'm hungry. Am I? I'm actually not hungry. I feel fine. Why do I want to go eat? What's underneath that? Or like, why do I feel
And
like I
what's
need to
under
drink
it?
coffee? And then what's under that? Or like, I have energy. Why do I need a coffee? What part of me is pulling me to coffee right now? What is that actually doing for me or covering up? Do I feel like I need more energy? And that's the thing is like I don't want to, and I don't want people to get into like this spiral of asking themselves why so much that they become paralyzed. It's a very quick, simple thing. It might seem like it takes a long time, but it's very simple. It's just checking in with yourself. It's the basis of mindfulness and meditation. It's checking in with your body. How am I feeling? Why did I interrupt my wife? Was I listening to her? Why am I, and it's just asking those questions.
What do you make of this? I tend to be an interrupter.
Again, it's not just a male or masculine or feminine thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's also a personality thing. Also, look, and I'm, again, I can't speak for you, but I do know women that have had to interrupt their entire lives in order to get men to listen to them, to be
Yeah,
forceful, to be
maybe. Right,
dominant. I don't,
right.
like, again, it's like you have to look at the whole playing field and wonder, you know, again, it's a trait. It's not just like every man's an interrupter. It's just that we're
No.
taught to be interrupters, right? Also, there's family dynamics, and there's a whole thing. I don't know if you come from a Jewish background or what your background is or an Italian background, but you know, that's also a way of communicating.
Right.
In the Jewish tradition, right? It's a way of engaging in conversation and making somebody feel seen or heard. By interrupting somebody, you're engaging in a conversation and letting them know that you're actually active and not bored, right? So
That's
it's
it.
cultural. It's also cultural for some people, and especially, there's a lot of Jewish women specifically that have that cultural trait that are looked at. Though, keep in mind, this is where and I don't know if you've had this experience. I'm curious if you had. As a man, it's normal. As a man, it's completely normal for me to interrupt. Nobody says anything. Most women just expect it. Luckily, I have women in my life who mirror and show me. But with women, but I'm curious, and I want to know, as an interrupter, how do people respond to you?
Well, see,
How do
okay.
men respond to you?
Interesting. So a couple of interesting things that you said. So number one, I was going to say before you actually said it, the cultural element, that it's a family thing. It is family. I inherited this, no question, from my dad, probably more than anybody else, and his parents and everybody else. So that's part of it. But the dichotomy is I'm also a listener. Like as an interviewer, as a therapist, that's one of my strengths, is to really hear people and really listen to what they're saying. Let them talk, the whole thing. So it does sometimes surprise me that I'm both.
Is your brain like, what am I listening, interrupting? What am I supposed to do? Do you have does your brain kind of explode sometimes? How do you balance when you're going to interrupt and when you're going to listen?
I think it's what you said. I think it's when it's a moment when I'm like showing that I'm in that conversation with you, or that I'm with you. I think that's maybe the common thread, is that I'm listening and I'm with you and I'm really feeling and hearing what you're saying. And then at the same time, when I do interrupt, it is that, hey, we're together, we're connected on this. So it is funny. It's sort of a different dynamic, a different type of interrupting, I guess, than you're talking about that normally happens, that women experience normally from men. Different, a little different.
Yeah, and the interrupting I'm talking about isn't cultural. It's somebody has it's my wife and I in a conversation or in an argument, and I interrupt, and what that does is it's belittling what she's saying, and I'm saying I'm right. Right? It's saying, yeah, but, or right, it's a different type of interruption. The cultural interruption that you're talking about is very much a yes and, right? I think the interruption that a lot of women experience with men is a no, but.
You're good. Were you team Raphael or were you team Michael?
Well, for my ego, I was team Raphael, because, as a man, as like the actor, you want your character to win, right? To win the girl. I think in life, I think it's tricky because I got to play this guy for 5 years, and so I understand. I know his insecurities, and he's a good man. Yet he's like me. Like he had, look at his father. He was adopted. He had his mother. It's like the whole thing was just everything. All the social forces against Raphael were so huge that it's a miracle that he ended up as good as he did. And really, if you look at why, it was because of cancer and ultimately because of Jane, because the women, right? So I got his journey. So as a person who was living in his shoes, I was team Raphael. As an outside observer, I would have been team Michael, because I want to reinforce the narrative that the good guy can get the girl, that the good guy can win, right? Now, he also messed up and got jealous and did a lot of bad things, and nobody, all of the heroes were flawed, which is why I think the show was so great. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it was who Jane decided she wanted for herself. So maybe that means I was team Jane. I don't know.
Right. That's so interesting. So I'm going to defend Raphael because he wasn't a bad guy, I'm going to say. And
No, he wasn't a bad guy
right.
at all.
He just, right, maybe was not as in touch with himself as Justin Baldoni is becoming.
Of course not. And he didn't, because, he didn't have Emily Baldoni or Jane Gloriana Villanueva in his life until he did, right? His entire life was about earning his father's love. And that's and the only thing, and his father didn't really even love him because it wasn't even his dad.
Mm-hmm.
He found out later on, but his father only cared about success and money and hotels, and he was living in his father's shit. So of course he's going to be that way. Of course he's going to be the way that he was. So it's about, again, you walk a mile in his shoes and suddenly you understand everything.
Yeah.
You have compassion.
So true. So one of the things I think that's why I was bringing up Jaime as well, is because one of the things he told me was the reason why it worked so well is because everybody, all the characters were sincere, right? It could have looked silly or, over the top or whatever, but everyone was sincere. Like every character, you love every character. There was no character in there that you didn't, except for it's been a couple of years. What was her name? The villain? Do you remember?
The
Who's the villain?
villain, Magda, Rose.
Rose. Rose.
Yeah, Sin Rostro.
Rose. Right. That's right.
No, but you even liked her. Just, Bridget, who played her, was just so charming and so good. You like everybody, and that's what they tried to do, and that's what happens also when you, I think, have a women-led show.
Right.
Is you write three-dimensional characters, and you have compassion and empathy for all of them.
It's
Even the
so
ones
good
that are
to
driving
see.
the story forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good to see that because you know that there aren't that many complex women shown on TV, but here in Jane there were so many. It was good for humanity to see all of that, I think. So,
Yeah.
is there going to be a sequel of Jane the Virgin?
No. No.
Just flat out no?
No, there's not. It was 5 years, 100 episodes, a beautiful experience. It was always going to be 4 to 5 years. That was the story arc of the show. I don't know. They might call us in a couple years or 10 years and say, hey, you want to do a reunion special, or, I don't know. Maybe the showrunner will come up with an idea for like a 6 episode or 5 episode. I don't know. But as of right now, no, it's it.
I might have some scoop because this is another thing that Jaime told me in our last interview was that Jenny was talking about she wanted to do some sort of a follow-up, not a whole sequel, but maybe like a 10 episode or something like that in the future. What's going on right now?
Oh, that's cool. I'd be down. All of us would do it.
We'd all watch it too.
All right. Well,
I hope we could do that.
Yeah. I haven't heard anything about it, but if it happens, if they call me one day, so long as I'm not off shooting a movie or, doing
Right.
something, I'm in.
So speaking of which, okay, so was that, I think I looked at your IMDb page. Was that your last acting role? So you've only been directing and writing since then?
Yeah, it was 2 years. We wrapped the show. It'll be 2 years. So I've been directing and writing the book and building our studio.
Right. So fun fact also in your book is that your wife, Emily, auditioned for Petra or was going to audition for Petra, the role of Petra.
She did audition for Petra.
That's so great.
Yeah. And I remember reading with her and being like instantly insecure about the way that Raphael was described and being like, oh my God, if she gets this, she's going to have to work with this guy. Like, who's this guy going to be? Like, he sounds dreamy. It's just, of course, that's the joke that life plays on you.
Right. But that is so interesting too. And you were kind of struggling, and I think you said you hadn't acted in 3 years when you got that role. So how did you even get that role?
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah. I was directing. I'd been directing a documentary series called My Last Days, where I was traveling the country and telling the stories of people that had terminal illness but were living amazing lives. And I was directing music videos and commercials. That was, and with the goal of one day, maybe in my 40s, becoming a feature film director. Right? I've been directing music videos since I was in my early 20s. So she had introduced me to her manager, who also represented directors, and we met. And I said, "Hey, this is what I want to do. This is the kind of stuff I'm directing. I'd love to do TV one day, movies, but for now I'm doing this kind of stuff." And they signed me, and then I said, "Hey, every once in a while I'd love to audition as an actor because I miss it. It was a part of my brain that I missed." And like 2 weeks later, they sent me Jane the Virgin. And I was like, this looks familiar. I feel like I just read with my wife. It turns out they had been looking for Raphael for months and months, and they had screen tested a bunch of guys, and chemistry read with Gina, and Jenny, the showrunner, was just not satisfied because he was the male heartbeat of the show. He was the male lead in terms of like the journey she had in her head for the character, which I wasn't aware of. I had no idea. And it was a very bizarre thing. I went in and like the next day they were like, come screen test. It's you. There was nobody else. Met with Gina. We read, we got along fabulously. We became like, BFFs, started talking about God and why we're here and all this stuff. Cause I hadn't acted. That was just a totally different wavelength. And that was it. Out of the audition room, they're like, congratulations. I was like, what? I've been acting for 10 years and that's never happened. It's never been that simple. They're like, no, it's you. And I was like, oh, okay. We shot the pilot. Had no idea what it was going to be. Shooting a pilot is still like a lottery. You don't know if it's going to happen. Tons of pilots are shot. Got a phone call, got picked up, and then we were off. Next thing we know, we're at the Golden Globes. And just, 5 years later, the show ended. And we knew it was not canceled. We knew it was only a 5-year show. And how lucky we were to have all 5 years. So,
Yeah. I mean, that is so wild that sometimes it just happens. You think that's it, and then it's the biggest break, and then it changes everything. And that probably helped launch you into whatever else you really wanted to do on top of acting. Am I right? That kind of.
well, yeah, because my goal wasn't acting. It was so I had already started a production company when I was working the show. I was directing, I was producing these documentaries, and that was what I was going to do. I wanted to make socially conscious media. I wanted to make stuff that touched people's hearts and made people feel. And when this happened, I was like, okay, well, most of my time's now going to go to the show, but if I can be mindful, if this show can help me kind of get in the Hollywood elite, so to speak, or open doors for me that I couldn't get open, then let me use this show mindfully to build the things that I deeply care about that can help make the world a better place. And so every day I was on Jane the Virgin, I was doing 3 or 4 other things to make sure that when it ended, I'd be in a position to have the biggest impact. So Jane was the rocket fuel to the rocket that I had been building prior to Jane. So
And
it was thought out in a lot of ways in terms of making sure that like, okay, great. So I'm on CBS and, 5 Feet Apart was a CBS film with Lionsgate, right? So everything had its place. And it took Jane the Virgin for anyone to take me seriously.
right. Isn't that, yeah. It just reminded me of something else that you said in the book about how when you were talking about body image and how you would feel, well, here's that word again, insecure sometimes when you were filming with your shirt off, right? Mm-hmm. And so you would share that a little bit on set. And of course, when you said, I'm starting to feel nervous or insecure about how I look, I have this scene coming up. And they would basically just laugh because what are you talking about? So that must be hard too. Like when you were writing the book, did you kind of think to yourself, like, did you worry about what are people are going to roll their eyes and be like, you have everything. What do you mean? Or is that a weird question? I'm not even sure what I'm thinking about when I ask you that. That really is interesting.
It was the best format to talk about it because nobody would interrupt me. Nobody would laugh at me. And it's just me writing. So, to have the able-bodied privilege I have and to have the body that I have that looks the way that it does kind of genetically, it puts me in a place in life where, because of also the social forces and how we're socialized, I'm not allowed to feel a certain way about my body except good. But that's not real. That's not fair, right? And, I can only write about what I know. And my experience with my body is that even though it looks good, it doesn't always feel good, or that I don't feel good. When you're written into a show and in the script it says we zoom in on Raphael's 6-pack, and yet I don't look in the mirror and feel like my 6-pack is good enough or defined enough for what the writer might have written, and that creates insecurity. I don't have anyone to share it with because society deems me to have a perfect body. So then what does that do? That just creates more shame and insecurity, and you feel like you can't talk to anybody about it. You're not allowed to. And in reality, there's a privilege that I have to have respect for. But at the same time, A lot of people that have really, really great bodies or who spend their time working out and fitness, deep down are covering up insecurity. They're masking something. They spend all day in the gym. Something else is going on, dude. Like, what are you not dealing with? And we lose ourselves in that. So you find something that you're getting external validation for, and then you put all your eggs in that basket. But what do we see? We see what happens when it becomes harder and harder. 38, 30, I'm 37 now. It's not as easy. 48, it's going to be twice as hard. 50, well, what do you see? You see men start taking performance enhancing supplements, testosterone, HGH, things that are not necessarily safe. You see, you risking your life to look a certain way so that you can not have to deal with the thing that you were masking anyways. Now, all that to say, we're also validating men who look a certain way in society. We're telling them that if you have a six-pack and wide shoulders, then you are enough. Not just for women, but for other men, that you're respected, right? We want that. We crave that. We need that. But at the same time, what's underneath it? I was just willing to say, hey, I don't feel good.
I'm a dad. So I was just willing to say and acknowledge, hey, I'm struggling here. I don't feel like I look great. I don't, can you give me a heads up when there's going to be a scene where I have to look like this? Because I don't just naturally walk around with the best six pack in the world. I just had a kid. I'm like working. I'm doing stuff outside of the show. Like I can't just work out all day. I'm here 14 hours a day. And that's a real thing. And then, I write about in the book that an article came out, I think it was in GQ, titled How We Ruined the Dad Bod. And I was one of the TV characters that ruined the dad bod. So here I was, suffering from an image that I'm helping perpetuate. And it was a very tricky thing. And again, it's a 1% problem. I'm a very unique person that has that issue. However, if I'm feeling it, there are other people that feel it. And I think it's important that we just, again, question everything and make room for, it doesn't matter if you have a perfect body, you should be allowed to feel how you feel as a man. If I'm not allowed to feel something, if you're telling me that I'm not allowed to feel that thing, then you're telling me that my feelings don't matter. So then you're teaching me and training me to not express my feelings, because when I do, I'm going to be shamed. That's what we teach boys at 7, 8 years old. That's what they learn in school. That's why, as Bell Hooks says, we engage in that psychic act of self-mutilation, because we don't have a way of processing our emotions or feelings without becoming vulnerable to attacked by men and women. So in that specific area of body image, I was just like, yeah, I was suffering because I didn't feel like I was enough, even though I was. And I had nobody to talk to about it, because when I would talk about it, people would laugh at me.
So interesting. And I think that's like a common experience, in the sense that if you have something that looks ideal to other people, then you almost don't have the room to have problems. But that's totally false. And again, this is a thing that, as a therapist, I totally see that it doesn't matter if things look perfect, that you're so lucky enough to have this, that, or the other thing. You're still entitled to have your struggles, right? And they may be a lot bigger than other people think they are, but like, I get this a lot with actors, where people think that, oh, well, what do they have to worry about? They're famous and they've made it to the top or whatever else. Well, no, they're humans. They're humans. And it doesn't matter if they achieved whatever else. They still have these, insecurities. Or I almost don't know. I almost have not met one person who does not have a ton of self-doubt, even the most confident person. It's
But that's also, so there's two things there. One is it's yes and, right? It's yes, they have made it. They are celebrities. They do have a certain type of privilege that most people don't. And that is an important thing to acknowledge in the complaining of something, right? Or in the struggle, because at the end of the day, the average person has a much harder life in a lot of ways. And so the privilege that the celebrity has is something that also should be acknowledged by the celebrity. But, it's important to also make room for the celebrity to be a person, a whole human being. Because otherwise, then we're treating celebrities as objects, things that don't have feelings, which is what we've done historically. And there's no room for their humanity, which is why when a celebrity kills him or herself or overdoses, we're all shocked, because we're like, but they're perfect. They had everything. Why would they do that? but you never see what's happening underneath. You never see under what's, the iceberg, right? That actually took down the Titanic. You just saw a little piece of it. There's always so much more. And
That's
so there
exactly
has
right.
to be room for us to be humans, regardless of whether you are a celebrity or just an everyday hardworking man. Because in the same way, you can look at it, the same pressure that, a guy who works a 9 to 5 on an oil rig is struggling with the same thing. He's not allowed to feel certain things as the celebrity who's living in his castle, but feeling completely lonely and depressed, but has no one to talk to.
Yeah.
They're both not allowed to feel the things that they're feeling. And that's where I think humanity comes in. That's where I think seeing people for who they are, not for what they do, comes in. But also, it's important for everybody to acknowledge whatever intersection of privilege they're living with. And I've learned that from my friends of color. My friends of color, I remember learning that, when I first heard a trans woman tell me that she had privilege, I was very confused. But then she told me, no, I have pretty privilege because a lot of trans women don't look like me. And I'm like, wow. So there's intersections, there's levels of privilege, there's levels of oppression. They're just things for us all to be aware of. And so long as we are aware of those things, we have to make room for us to be able to share and be our full selves. And that means sharing our humanity. That means sharing our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, right, in the book. So I had to talk about it. I had to talk about being the person that looks as good as he looks while also feeling like he doesn't. Because when you scroll down your Instagram and your social media and you see all these people that are getting likes and comments and follows because their bodies look the way that they do, my first thought is, man, they must feel trapped. I bet they're struggling because they can't post anything else. It's Pavlovian for them. They can only post shirtless pictures of themselves because that's the only thing that gives them their external validation. I wonder if that guy who's posting shirtless pictures and is working out all day long, deep down wants to post his poetry, but can't. That makes me sad.
Yeah.
For him. Who's he
Right.
talking to about these things? The women that like him, do they like him for him or do they like him for how he looks? That's what I think about when I see some of these guys. Why? Because I've been that guy. I've been trapped. And we're all experiencing our own versions of that. And so long, and as soon as we recognize that, we're able to see each other.
It's so interesting. So, right. Okay. I'm thinking of a couple of things. One is how you have these get togethers with other guys regularly where you talk about real things, which I think is really cool and great for everybody. I just want to mention that. It's in the book. Everybody can read about it. But going
Mandate.
back, what?
Mandates.
That's right. Going back to, I feel like you're so perceptive and smart and you know a lot about different things. And I know in the beginning of the book you talked about like how, am I smart enough? That's one of the things, right? So were you like a very insightful child? Like
No.
as a kid, you were not insightful. You weren't
Oh,
getting from people, oh, you really are nobody. Your parents even, your sensitive dad and your supportive mom.
no. I think I was put in a box as a troublemaker and a attention seeker and someone who very much struggled with focus. So I was a bad student. I was constantly being called in for parent teacher conferences. I barely passed algebra 2, which I took twice. I was not a good test taker. Got a 980 on my SATs both times. The second time I just filled in C half the time, right? All of the above or D, whatever one that was. I wasn't a good student, and mostly I think because I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel like I fit into the system. And I don't think it was until I was in my 20s that I felt comfortable to start even expressing my observations.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about student because I know what you wrote in the book about all the trouble you had as a student, but that doesn't mean you're not smart. Like a lot of kids who don't do well
I
in
was never called
school.
smart. I was never called. Even when you said a second ago, you're so smart, my first thought was like, Nah, because I was never called smart. It was not something that like you don't associate Justin Baldoni and smart. That's just not something that's not been my experience in my life. Maybe part of that can be because of the way that I look. Maybe my experience has been I've often been classified as somebody who looks a certain way. If you I didn't put this in the book, but one of the struggles I had was I put my heart into Jane the Virgin, but the weeks that would go by, and that everyone on the show got praised as actors, and I was praised for my physique. I was praised for the way that I looked. I was sexualized. I was objectified. I was praised for the tightness of my clothes and the gifs that were being made about me. I was never praised for my performance. So even in that, I found myself struggling with like, oh, so am I just the guy that sets up all these other great actors? So I was like, am I even a good actor? I would have all these doubts and questions as I would go on in the weeks because they'd keep getting written up, and Gina would get read up, and Yael would get, and everyone was talking about everybody except me. I was the guy who talked about my looks. So I think that especially for men in society and women, my God, women have this far worse than men do. We get put in boxes. Mm-hmm. The hot guy is very rarely smart. What's ironic is that I wasn't the hot guy until I was in my 20s. I just wasn't. Everything grew out of proportion. It just was the way that it was. I was gangly and skinny, and like I had braces, and I was a junior. The big eyebrows. Like it wasn't what it seems. So I had a big personality. I would overcompensate. I was the cocky guy, but I wasn't the smart guy. And no, I don't think people. I think intelligence is generally tied to being book smart. It's tied to the quotes that you can recite. It's tied to the books that you read. It's tied to how you speak and the words and the big words that we use. And as we try to, there's even, and especially in the intellectual community, there's a way of peacocking, even there, where you have a way of leading with certain things because you want people to know how smart. I mean, that's what the world we're living in. So I've just always been in the middle of like everything. So to answer your question is no.
Okay,
no.
so I definitely have things to say about that because I see everything that you're saying and it's so interesting, but I can tell you're smart because there's in this conversation we're having.
Sweetheart? She said I'm smart, baby. She said congratulations.
No, you can go about the rest of your day. But for real, I don't just throw that out. I don't just give that out to anybody. But what we're talking about and the things that you come back with and think about, you're very sharp. So that's intelligence. So it doesn't matter how you do or if school, that in the box thing works for you or not. It's not always a reflection. It can be, but it's not the only type of reflection on how smart you are.
I appreciate that. And I feel it my parents do feel that way about me, but the world has taught me something different. And so
Right.
that's just my experience. But that's also why I wrote the book for myself, was because I was like,
But the fact that you can observe all these things and then take that information and do things with it, draw conclusions about things or make associations with things, like certain things that I'm not thinking of anything specific, but a few different times in our talk, I talked about something and then suddenly you were like, oh yeah, and then, so it's yeah, and, right, yes, and, but you were able to connect it to something else that somebody who's not intelligent doesn't have that ability.
I appreciate it very much.
Now you need to start reflecting on that a little bit more. And
I absolutely will. I absolutely will.
because I do see it for sure. Okay, so are we good? Did we talk about everything that you want to promote? Did we talk about your new No, we didn't talk about your new projects. So do you want to tell me what you're working on now? So I saw you have a movie in the works, right?
Yeah. We have I started a studio. So we finance and make movies and TV shows, and I have a movie I'm attached to direct, and the movies we're producing, which is exciting. But yeah, we're starting, and we're also starting. I don't know, when is this going to air? This podcast?
So probably at the end of April because your
Okay,
reps
yeah.
would
So
like us to.
yeah, so I'm shooting
Yeah.
right now. So we're shooting the Man in a Podcast right now, which is really exciting. So we're having conversations. These are fun, uncomfortable conversations with myself and one of my best friends, Jamie, who I write about in the book, specifically in the Privileged Enough chapter. and Liz Plank, who wrote For the Love of Men. So we have this podcast where I brought them together and we talked to some famous folks about this stuff and get uncomfortable because not everybody will agree, and it's a pretty cool show. It's a pretty cool thing.
So I feel like after you talk about this stuff again and again and again, and you've written about it, so you spend a lot of time, I'm sure, not just writing it, but editing it and re-editing it, right? So do you feel like it's still as difficult and emotional for you when you talk about it, or does it have a little bit less gravity for
No,
you
no,
inside?
no. It's more. I mean, the more I keep having to reread my book to remember half the stuff I wrote, but also to and read other people's books, and because it's you a book doesn't a book doesn't do it. I mean, this is the beginning.
Yeah.
It's just the beginning of the journey. And so I read my book kind of like my own journal sometimes to remind myself of like, oh, okay, that's what I was feeling. That's what I was doing. And then I go back and I learn and I have these conversations and it doesn't lose its gravity because it's a serious social issue. It's not like, oh, I'm going to move on to my next thing. I mean,
But not the issue itself, just your how you feel, how difficult it is, or like the turmoil that you feel.
it's not about, it's the biggest struggle I have with it is, am I going to do it justice? Because I'm a much better writer than a speaker off the cuff. And because I'm an automatic writer. So when I sit down to write, like it just shit comes out and a lot of the book, I was like, oh, I didn't even know I felt this way. I had some of the book is me observing in real time things, about myself, I remember writing a whole chapter, a whole section on protection and what it means for men to want to be able to protect a woman. And I remember like finishing this whole section and being like, oh my God, I never thought of that. Like
That was so interesting. Yeah.
So I just want to do it justice. And that's the thing. I don't have a hard time talking about the things I write about in the book or my insecurities or my flaws or being vulnerable in that way because the reason I'm doing it isn't for adulation or praise. It's to model it so that other men feel comfortable doing it. It's so funny when my TED Talk came out, I saw so many, again, I remember the 2-minute Facebook clip was shared like so many times. It had 50 million views in 2 days. And it was just thousands of men just ripping on me. And I remember over and over again, guys were being like, he's just trying to get pussy or whatever they would say. And I'm like, I'm married. The comedian would then say, I don't get any, but that's not true. But I'm like, I'm married, right? It's the last thing that I'm trying to do here.
Right.
This is just real. But that's what we do is we put these people in boxes. We put men in boxes and we judge their intentions. And I just want men to just see that like it doesn't make you less of a man to share this stuff. And if I share it and a man, 5 men, 1,000 men resonate with something, a chapter, an experience, then that means they feel seen and then they're going to feel comfortable sharing that thing with another man. If we're constantly in silos and not sharing anything, then all of us think we're the only ones experiencing it.
That's the thing. I think that really is the thing, that it's such a common experience to feel these feelings and these complexities, but have no idea. Think you're the only one because you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to share about it. So I think you're going to have a big impact on that. And it's really a worthwhile mission.
People read it.
If what?
I said, if people read it.
People will read it. People will read it. I'm sure of it. So, I just read that you're moving to Ojai, or did I see that you're moving to Ojai? Is that your new step?
Oh, yeah,
you're in Ojai. How is that?
It's heaven. It's heaven. We live in the country in Ojai, so we don't live in the town. And it's amazing. I'm looking out over the Topa mountain ranges right now that are filled with snow because it rained last night, and it's gorgeous. It's green and surrounded by nature.
So you're really finding yourself as you evolve and mature in your life.
At 37, I'm starting to find myself.
That's young. That's young. It is Come on, you know, I know you need to know that. You would know that most, I don't know if I want to say most, but many, many people, number one, never find themselves.
True.
And number two, if they do, it's later in life after they've had time to reflect and explore.
I'm very grateful that I got married at 29, you know, and I've had a family and, you know, experienced some success at a fairly early age because I'm grateful that it's happening now, but it doesn't, you know, I'm finding myself, but I'm sure I'm going to refine myself at 45 and 55 and 65, you know?
That's how it should be. You need to keep, you know, people, I think all of us, it's good for all of us to keep evolving, to keep finding ourselves, keep understanding ourselves better. And like we said before, other people benefit from that, not just us.
Yeah, that's the goal.
That's a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to end with my favorite question,
Okay.
which has two parts.
Okay.
Okay. And then we'll wrap up and I'll just ask you to do a little testimonial afterwards. So, okay. Number one is, what do people think of you? Like, I'm going to rephrase that. What's the image that you think people have of you?
Define people. I think there's a lot of different images of me. I don't
Why don't
know.
you tell me what the different ones are?
I think there are some people that think it's all bullshit that look at me and be like, oh, he's just, you know, just profiting off of vulnerability or doing good in the world or, you know, whatever. I think there are people that look at me and are confused of why someone who maybe looks the way that I do or has what I have is going against it so much and willing to talk about things the way that I talk about things. I think there are people that look at me and go, how the fuck does he do everything that he's doing? Excuse my language. Like, where does he have time? How's that possible? I think there are people that look at me and and say, oh, he's really sincere and pure and he makes me happy. I don't know. It depends on who the people are. And I think there's a lot of people men who look at me and they think, oh, you know, whatever they say, cuck boy or all the, you know, beta, what are all the things that they say. I think I'm something different to anybody and everybody. I don't know if this is going to be the second part of your question. What I hope people look at me as is somebody who is doing his best to live as sincerely and authentically as he can with the platform, and show the human parts of me, the human parts of life, and help people realize that none of us have it figured out, that none of us get out of this life alive, and that who we are as we are is enough. We don't have to be more than we are. And I hope that I can model that. I hope I can model what it's like to mess up and get back on your feet, and what it's like to have a marriage and kids and work your ass off and then still feel like you're not doing enough. I think I just want to model what it means to be a human and have a small platform. So.
Okay, that was close. The second part was, who are you really? So not how you hope people see you, but who you really are, because this is really famous, of course.
Yeah. So what I would say is actually they're the same. So what I project, what I want people to see is who I really am. So I don't want to project something that I'm not ever. Mm-hmm. So what I just said, I want people to know and see is my truth, is who I really am, which is a guy trying to figure it out, a guy who's married, who's trying to become the best version of himself, a guy trying to show up for his kids, but feels like he always doesn't, and somebody trying to navigate the complexities of what it means to be a public person in a private world, and be true to myself. Who I really am is a Baha'i. I'm somebody who loves my faith, who loves God, who knows we're only here for a short time, and really wants to be of service with the time that he has.
Okay, you said three things that I need to follow up with because they're all interesting. So number one, can you tell me a little bit more about your faith, like how you're finding yourself now? And that's part of it, I think, right? That probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, look, my faith is really, the Baha'i faith, we believe in the unity of all the religions. We're all different chapters. All the religions are different chapters in one book. It's something called progressive revelation, the idea that there's one God. It's not a guy in the sky with a beard. It's not a man, not a woman. It's not a person. It's an entity. The idea that we cannot fathom as finite beings the infinite. We can't fathom a world with no time and space. We can't fathom something that could create the universe. We can't even picture the universe. The universe never ends. And the Baha'i faith believes that all the religions are one at its core, that God, for the beginning of time, before recorded history, has sent down messengers and teachers to help get the world, humanity, mankind closer to unity. And that the purpose of life is to develop all of the spiritual attributes of God, all of the things that we, without knowing it every day, we're developing, the things that we're developing when we get tested, when we get frustrated, when we get angry, when we get hurt: patience, love, kindness, compassion, empathy, right? Ironically, things that women are a little bit better at than men. And the reason why we need to develop those things is because one day we're going to die of this world and be born into a new world where we don't need our bodies. And in place of our bodies, we're going to have our virtues. We're going to have the things that we spent this time developing. So it's about being of service. It's about being kind and loving and compassionate. It's about always being mindful of who you are. It's about keeping your feet on the ground and treating people the way you want to be treated, and even more so, oftentimes treating people better than you want to be treated. It's about creating a just and equitable world, getting rid of racism and sexism and all of the isms, and then when there is something you're not in alignment with, or when you disagree with someone, or when someone has a different lifestyle choice than yours, it's being overly kind to them, and also making sure that they are loved and that you never gossip or backbite about them. Because the worst thing you could ever do in the Baha'i faith is talk poorly about another human being. Because the cause, the reason is unity. That's why it exists. And for us to ever achieve unity in our lives, ever achieve unity in the world, it has to start in our own homes. It cannot spread unless it starts here in the mirror in our own homes. So that's the faith. That's what I believe in. And yeah.
Well, that's all good. I mean, you can't argue with any of that. You know what I mean? It's just all yes to all of that. Okay, the other two things. Number one is you said something about parenting, just trying to do the best you can, always feeling like you're not. Okay, I heard something once, perfect. If you ever want to feel like, actually, yeah, okay, I'm not going to say, I just said it once off the top of my head, and I've repeated it a million times. It's true. If you ever want to feel like a failure, be a parent. Doesn't matter what you do. You can feel like so good about certain things you do. You're always going to feel like a failure. It's just how it is.
Yep.
Okay, and then the last thing is fame. I didn't ask you about fame. Like, what is it like for you generally? Being famous, being recognized. People see you probably and they'll know you right away. How is that experience?
It's the opposite of the experience I had growing up, because people would talk about you. People would talk about me growing up, but they talk about me in a negative way. Oh, he's this or he's that, or that's that kid or that. So, growing up and having fame is interesting. I want to make sure the way I look at it is this. If I can make somebody's day with a minute of my day, if I can make somebody's month or a year by taking a minute of my day, then that's something that I'm going to always try to do. So I don't have there's different levels of fame. I don't have the type of fame where like people chase me down the street anywhere I go. I'm not Shawn Mendes or Harry Styles or George Clooney. But the people that follow me or that care about me, I mean something to them. And so I value that and I appreciate that. And so I always will try to make time for them. There might be a point in my life or someone else's life where that becomes unmanageable and you have to take time for yourself. But I look at fame as a gift in that it has given me so much. And the only way I can ever feel good about having it is if I give more. So I try to give more than I take. So I'm always giving. I'm giving it away. It's what we're told in the Baha'i faith we should do. We should give ourselves away. And I try to use my fame to create other fame, to highlight things that are important to me, to make somebody feel better, to make somebody feel seen. And also the thing about fame is that I know it's temporary. So I don't get attached to it. And that's the other very, very important thing is one day the fame will disappear. Jane the Virgin will be a memory in someone's mind. And if I don't take another acting job, I'll just be a person behind the scenes that was once that guy, and that goes away. So, Baha'u'llah in the Baha'i Faith says that wealth is followed by poverty, and poverty is followed by wealth. And I have no qualms about the understanding that this is a temporary thing. Now I have to trick myself into making sure that I don't try to chase it or to keep it. That's the key. And that's where that creates anxiety, and that's what creates that, you get stuck in that loop. So long as you have fame and you're comfortable with it going away, then I think you'll be fine. But if you try to keep it, if you try to hold on to it, you suffocate it.
Right. Okay. So that's more of you reflecting, observing, thinking about things, philosophies, analyzing them in your head, and doing something with them.
Trying.
Intelligence. Sorry, I had to say it.
I'll take it. I honor that. Thank you. I am smart enough.
I'm Kara. This is Really Famous, where you really get to know your favorite celebrities on another level because I was a therapist. So if you have a comment about today's show, please drop it below. I do read the comments. Don't forget to smash the like button and tap on subscribe so you get all my celebrity interviews.